Hello, this is History Literacy Ready, Unit 2, Lesson 7, participating in a Socratic Seminar. In this lesson, students gather evidence using what they've already read, and they've read a number of documents so far about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they've also studied these up to this point in the unit, and they're going to gather that evidence in order to answer a guiding question, and then they're going to participate in a Socratic Seminar. The materials that they've looked at so far are Eisenhower's farewell address and JFK's commencement address, which they just read in Lesson 6, Tyndall and Shai's textbook chapter on the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs fiasco prior to that. They have notes from a Cold War lecture, and they have all their notes in organizers. They also have Khrushchev's note to Kennedy, Dobrynen's report to the Foreign Ministry, Robert Kennedy's report to Secretary of State, and in addition, not listed here, but they also have the political cartoon. They have the two quotes by Khrushchev that they did in the very first Cuban Missile Crisis lesson, which was lesson 2. So what students are going to do first to get oriented to the task is they're going to review the essential questions guiding the unit. There is one question, and then there are some sub-questions that break down that question into all the kinds of things that they need to think about in order to answer the question. And so you will review that with them. And then you're going to have to teach them about Socratic seminars, especially if they have not participated in one ever. It's likely that they may not have. I have provided for you in this this PowerPoint a link to a World History class Socratic seminar. This is one version of one, and yours doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it does give you and perhaps your students a little better idea of how these are supposed to proceed. If students have not participated in a Socratic seminar, then it may be more important to have them watch the video and make these points. What you're going to have students do is sit in a circle, and they're going to be facing each other. They're going to reflect on a question, which is the essential question, and that question really has no right answer. So there are lots of sides to it, and that's good fodder for a Socratic seminar. And maybe one of the biggest differences between this and a regular discussion, whole class discussion, is that the discussion is between students and the teacher stands in the background. The students use evidence from the text to support their ideas, so that's really an important aspect of Socratic seminars. Is these are text-based answers or discussions about the essential questions. So they're always referring back to what they've been reading. And the last point to remember is that the discussion is not a debate. You're not having sides and people aren't choosing sides. What this is meant to be is be an open discussion for, which is useful for students coming to some decisions about their own views and the evidence used to support them. Now, they may be a little reticent or shy if they have not already participated in a Socratic seminar. On the other hand, I know that there are classes where some students want to talk all the time and they don't give others the opportunity to say anything. So if you, one of the things you want to do if you want to encourage responsible participation could be to figure out some way to get everybody to respond. You can, for instance, dispense chips or discussion tickets so that, let's say, everybody who's in the discussion gets 2 chips. That means they can say 2 things. They can't switch the chips and they have to use them all up. That means that everybody gets a chance to say 2 things and everybody has to say 2 things. You can also use a checklist to monitor contributions. Let students know you're doing this, that you're going to be making sure that everybody is participating. You can have students evaluate each other using a fishbowl design. So when you have a fishbowl design, you're putting a group who's doing the discussion in the center of the fishbowl, and then there is another group in a circle around that center group. They are observing the discussion. They're not participating in it. And then what they're doing is they're coming up with some evaluation or critique of the actual discussion. There are 3 different questions that are sub-questions of the essential question. And so what you can do is you can assign students just one question. You can have them pick just one question, or you can group people and assign questions to different groups. So the 3 questions are: were the concepts of liberty and equality reflected in U.S. foreign policy? If so, how? If not, why not? So that is a question that asks you to look at the actions and the policies of the United States and the stuff that they have read, which is about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and to answer the question, were they following their own concepts of liberty? What differences or disagreements existed in conceptions of liberty and freedom by those participating in the Cuban Missile Crisis? And finally, did the concepts of liberty and freedom change over the course of the 60s as reflected in U.S. foreign policy? If so, how? If not, why not? Well, since you've gone through Eisenhower to Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's as far as you've gone. It will be over that short span of time before and after the Cuban Missile Crisis, bookended by those 2 presidential speeches. That one has a change over time component to it, so students will have to wrestle with how do you tell about change. This is a view of part of the graphic organizer for the essential questions. You don't have to use this one. Students will, of course, want to write more in each of the boxes, so this is truncated. If they're only going to answer one question, then they'd only be have one column, or the first column, and then the column that relates to their question as the graphic organizer they're going to use. But in each case, for each of the different sources they are looking at, they are going to figure out what the author's claim might be in answer to that question, and then what evidence from the text there is that would support that claim that they feel that the author is making. Before they start, I would really suggest that you have them review the evaluation rubric, how they're going to evaluate each other and how you will be evaluating them, because this tells them the kind of behaviors that you're expecting of them. And if they really are at sea about what a Socratic Seminar is, you might also even do a little modeling for students in terms of the kinds of things that they can say, how they're going to signal turns, all that kind of thing, how they're going to actually come up with meeting the rubric standards. And you see the rubric has below target, target, and above target. So looking at the target and above target will give them an idea of the kinds of behaviors you're expecting. So you're going to be, hard for some teachers to do, you're going to be monitoring in the background, and you're going to be monitoring these things, their ability to take turns, actively listen, take notes, provide evidence from the text, and be respectful. You're not going to actually be a part of the discussion. This is for the students to do. And if they ask you a question, yes, it's okay to provide them a quick answer if it's that kind of a question, or to send them back to the group to wrestle with the answer to that question themselves. One of the things that they're going to do, because they're leading the discussion, you're not calling on people, they're going to be figuring out who's talking and in what sequence they're talking. So what I would do is, before you start, decide with your students how turns will be taken. Sometimes the student who's doing the talking will then pick the next person to do the talking. There are also ways that you can help students figure out how to transition from one student talking to the next. I know some people recommend that once that person has gone talking and finished talking and picked another student to talk, that student, before they say their own thing, discusses what the last person just said and then says something like, well, on the other hand, I believe, or I agree with that person because, or here's another point that I wanted to make along that line. Those kinds of turn taking will help build a flow of the discussion. So you want to talk about that before they actually get started. And you want to choose one individual to start. Well, before you all do that, you're going to give them time to collect the evidence. So they can do this as homework. If you don't have time in class, you can give them some time in class if you do have time. So in activity 3, they are gathering the evidence, deciding on a position, and they're participating in the seminar. What you're doing during this time is you're monitoring students and you're staying in the background. You are not putting yourself into the conversation. But if things start to go awry, you're bringing it back to that point where they can keep on participating. When they're done with the discussion, then they can engage in self-evaluation. There is the evaluation form for them there in their student academic notebook to do. If they are using the fishbowl, then students outside the fishbowl can also evaluate students in the fishbowl. So they can do a self-evaluation when they're in the discussion, and when they're in the fishbowl, they can do an evaluation of the group that did the discussion. So one of the things you're going to have to decide is if students are evaluating each other, how are they going to share this? And since you've been talking about being respectful, you would hope that the evaluations are respectful as well. You might pick them up and distribute them to the groups and let them read them. You might, have a conversation with each of the groups about their evaluations. But however you're going to do it, you probably want to plan that ahead of time so that you'll have a procedure to follow that students are going to feel comfortable with. So once students have evaluated themselves, and if they have had others evaluated them, read the evaluations of the others, then they're going to use what they learned in the discussion to revise their claim or position in relation to one of the questions, or revise their support or evidence they're using in relation to one of the questions. And they're going to list the support they now have for their revised claim if they revised it, and that whatever support that was, how it helped to change their minds. So this is the last assignment that they do, and again, if you are running short of time, they can do this for homework. Or you can, if you have some time, you can have students do it in class. And they can turn that in for a grade if you need to grade your students on this. So that's the end of lesson 7. This is a lesson that students are really taking control in, and they are showing that they can participate in an academic discussion, which is an important aspect of the kinds of things that they will be doing in college. So this should be a big learning experience for them.